Good afternoon, friends. Thanks for organizing this online and offline forum. Today our session is Economy of Digital Currencies, QR payments or card systems. And at the beginning I would like to greet our speakers. We have online speakers. We have a mixture today. I'm together with you, and speakers will be online. So, today together with us, Denis Dadon, Director of the Center for Development and Innovation of Alpha Bank. Good evening, Denis. Roman Prokhorov, the Chairman of Association of Financial Innovations, with 20 years of experience in banking sphere, including the Central Bank of the Russian Federation. Good afternoon, colleagues. We're glad to see you. Also, we have Maria Granovskaya, FinTech Chamber's leading expert, State Duma, at the invited professor of MGIMO, one of the leading lawyers of Russia, dealing with international law for digital financial assets. Good afternoon, Maria. Good afternoon. Also, we have our friends, guests from South Africa, Mr. Philonim Tembu, Executive Director of the Institute of Global Dialogue, South Africa. Good afternoon, Mr. Mtembu. And we also have guests from Brazil, Luis Eduardo Melin, ex-head of National Bank of Economic Development of Brazil. Good afternoon, Melin. Before we start to the panel discussion, I would like to say a few words why today this topic is important. I'm sure that many of you have heard about digital currency of central banks, and I'm pretty sure that your knowledge of different payment systems such as Alipay, WeChat, they're very spread in Russia using QR codes. And of course everyone has a card of one of the payment system. It can be Visa, MasterCard, or our Russian Mir. And we know that in Brazil they have their own payment system, but in South Africa they don't have such a payment system. So today the topic of this currency is very actual. In January this year, an international economic forum in Davos, around 60 central banks, 40 central banks and other organizations analyzed the experience of more than 60 experiments, have concluded the document, the instructions for central banks that would like to launch their own digital currency of central bank. Months ago, Bank of Russia published a consultation report, and right now active consultings are being carried out with banks about do we need digital ruble for Russian economy, what kind of it should be. And around 80% of international bank, 80% of all central banks in Russia, in the world, announced about the interests and being ready to launch digital currencies of central banks. So we'll speak about this in the first part, and the second part will be about the payment systems, whether we are ready and the payment systems ready to operate digital currencies. And here we have initiative that was born during the South African BRICS Pay. So let's turn to speakers. We will have several stages. Some speakers will present their own position, small reports. Then we will turn to discussion. The question, all the participants online can ask questions. So people present here, you can also raise your hand, and you can ask questions during the discussion. As I said, before speaking about digital currencies, whether they will come into our life, it's important to understand the ecosystem. Are they correct? The Association of Financial Innovations and Roman Prokhorov, please, made a certain report on how to build correctly, how to function such financial ecosystems. Roman, please take the floor. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrei. Thank you for the organizers. I think all the participants will get new knowledge, new competences. If it is possible, I can switch on the presentation. Okay, so now we have presentation. Ecosystems, why and what for? So the major topic of our panel discussion is digital currencies and payment systems, but we cannot regard these topics without understanding of where global economic processes are moving in new reality, in what new reality they will function. The payment systems, the payment services, and digital currencies, and so on. So understanding this is very important. And if we speak about ecosystems, so today, capitalization of top 10 ecosystems of the world, Amazon, Google, and so on, it's 3 times bigger than the capitalization of top 10 oil and gas corporations. So it says that ecosystems are living, they're developing, and we will try to understand how they develop, in what directions, and why it happens this way. Can we have next slide, please? So, from the biological point of view, the definition of ecosystem is presented on this picture. So it's used in economics in different segments, not only in financial sphere. So we will speak about it later. In many jurisdictions, ecosystems grew up not from financial systems, but they start including it on later stages. Next slide, please. On this slide, we can see several definitions of ecosystems. That would be, there is no certain unified, a dogma definition. And maybe it's good, but I like the last one on this slide. So it's products and services not crossing in and verticals. It's mobile connections, banking, food tax, and so on. Next slide, please. If we speak about the reasons of creations, the basic reasons are 3 shown on this slide. It's competition, sharpening that we see in all the segments of the market. It's search for additional profit sources, the diversification using different mechanics of client loyalty, and a very important aspect is creation of barriers for the competitors, because it's very important for competitiveness, and it's very actively used by different economic subjects. Next slide, please. If we speak about the reasons of creation of ecosystems, we of course see that the Rome wasn't built in a day. and their development had certain stages. Basic reasons was first, it's first big clientele. We all see that the systems grew up from social networks, huge credit organizations, mobile operators, internet search engines, and of course internet shops. And the second very important component is the necessity of necessary level of development of technologies that allow to gather, collect, and keep the data about the products and services. And when this data grew into new quantity, possibility of getting client portrait and offering new services to the clients. Next slide, please. If we speak about demands of clients that are satisfied within these ecosystems, in most cases not satisfied, but are formed in these ecosystems. We have a list of them on the slide, so I will try to save time and don't pay much attention to that. We all understand that our customers are moving towards getting services in one place with one click to get relevant contents, targeted offers, and use different communication channels. And the ecosystem solves these tasks, these demands, in the most effective way for the customer. Next slide, please. What the ecosystem gave, we can see here is the results that I was speaking at the beginning. So it's increase of capitalization, getting loyalty. It's possibility of rendering additional services to clients. It's a service here and now. So the client, through the connection with the existing system of loyalty, gets additional opportunity to get a service that wasn't rendered to him previously. Free services, because we have possibility of lower the tariffs for some services to fight competitors effectively. Targeting and possibility of evaluating suppliers of services with the help of possibility of information platform that allow to process big data, including artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. If we speak about evolution of the markets, in a short period of time we noticed this movement from a traditional marketplace that has become traditional today to platform decisions, and right now we see the realization of ecosystem. And ecosystem includes elements of platform and elements of marketplace, uniting them together, comprising them together. Next slide, please. On this slide, we tried to give a crosscut of what we have today. First of all, it's American corporations, Chinese corporations, and some Russian corporations. Here we have a very interesting picture I was speaking about. So, about the origins of ecosystems. So we can see that growing ecosystems from financial organizations, from credit organizations, it's a Russian know-how. Because in the world, the primary is the internet shops and other platforms. So next slide. Thank you. This is the evaluation of the most demanded directions of ecosystems from the point of view of credit organizations. So don't be surprised, maybe, and you have maybe another view how it should be formed, but here the biggest part is services for business, then services connected with accommodation. This is the mortgage, purchase and sales, managing your welfare, state services, servicing retail, transport, and the last place takes healthcare, even though the opinion poll was taken during pandemics. And of course, in ecosystems we can speak a lot. We can dedicate the whole conference to that, but I would like to say a few words how it affects the competition. If we speak about Russia, we have, in July this year, we have a law adopted about financial deals using marketplaces. So today, the legislator legalized the marketplace, the creation of marketplace, gave it definition, and it's presumed that this instrument will allow for small players on the market to actively sell their products. In fact, today, both in the world and Russia, we see different tendencies. We see that huge players or big players, by forming their ecosystems, they push out small players from the markets by narrowing their possibilities of participating in this competitive field. And this tendency was singled out by Bank of Russia, was highlighted by Bank of Russia, but no active measures has been taken yet. In Chinese People's Republic, they tried to introduce some limiting measures against Alibaba. You heard story about the Facebook in America, but this is all fragments. If we speak about regulating of this new phenomenon as ecosystem, including in financial sphere, from our point of view, in the near future, we must see some regulatory effects, and they must be above nationals, because the story with ecosystem is transnational, and it's very important that the customer will not suffer from this and the competition will not suffer. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your report, and I know that the Association of Financial Innovation was one of the first to start working with not only banks but with other organizations that build a new ecosystem based on digital currencies. In this respect, can you share why do you see future for digital ecosystems built on digital currencies of central banks or some other digital currencies? Yes, Andrei, thank you very much for your question. Yes, of course. We considered the story with digital currencies as one of the key evolutional directions in development of financial sphere, and not only financial sphere, but economy in general. And this big interest to the problem of digital currency from the side of central banks that we observe today proves that this is a very important decision indeed that will allow to bring a new blood, so to say, into the new into the existing paradigm of existence of cash and virtual money to increase economic effectiveness. So the association made a right strategic choice, and I offer to listen a few speakers before we turn to discussion of this topic. And Roman showed a very interesting picture where ecosystem in the shape of a lake, and we all understand that these ecosystems must exist due to some internal laws, and these ecosystems cannot be disconnected. They cannot be isolated. It's always a big world with a lot of ecosystems in different states, for example. And I would like to give the next, to give the floor to Maria Granovskaya as a leading specialist, international specialist in financial technologies. So Maria, please tell us what are the tendencies of interconnection in the world that you see today. What legislation exists to regulate the use of digital currencies, and what steps should be taken by legislators, by governments, towards harmonization of such legislation. Maria? Good afternoon, colleagues. Can I have the presentation, please? Perfect. So today we'll speak about international regulation of payments and digital technologies. Next slide, please. And major trends that exist in my understanding and from the point of view of our colleagues in this field. First of all, if we speak about trans-border technologies, it's globalization and harmonization. A very vivid example of digital assets, the new, and that caused a lot of doubts by regulators. It's getting more and more speed of development in legislation, as special countries in United Europe. So we have market in crypto assets. It's new order of EU. So this is the latest example. Regional legislation is also developing. New laws, new national laws concerning integration of technology and financial sector and financial legislation to separate the classical financial market for classical players, financial players, and for adopt new licenses like in Switzerland. License more convenient for innovative companies with the requirements lower for in comparison with the banks, for example. They have access to enter the market quicker and easier. Singapore recognizes certain licenses of EU and licenses from Switzerland, so we see one direction of movement. Of course, they have some problems, but nevertheless, regional legislation, as I said before, appears and started developing in this decade, in these 5 years, the recent 5 years, in the recent 3 years. Several very interesting laws have been adopted, starting with blockchain, Gibraltar, and in Liechtenstein, Singapore, and so on, Switzerland, of course, and etc. And of course, countries of CIS made very interesting decisions. If we speak about legal qualifications, we found a very interesting trend of understanding what is new digital assets. Are they equivalent or non-equivalent to electronic money, and how to live with it? And this competition of national digital currencies, and the vivid example was Libra. Have non-acceptance from the United States, from France, about stable coins, and explanations how Libra can work in the country by making Libra a national Swiss company, not above national. But the one that comes from Switzerland brings some funds and allows the country to develop. Very interesting trend is decentralized finance, and the state, of course, takes different positions. And in respect, well, we have new rules that needs attention and studies from the point of view of regulators. Why do we need this for regulators as well? But decentralized stock markets, we have recommendations 15, 16 time ago, and then some others. The norms are changing despite whether there is technology or no technology in the project. Next slide, please. Because classical norms of financial market, when they're touched for the projects using new technologies. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Previous slide, if it's possible. We'll speak about, of course, one of the very interesting tendencies, digital currencies of central banks. For example, Swiss krone, Sweden and Swedish krone. Sorry. So they're working on this project. Of course, attention is attracted to China, and we speak about Brazil, where the banking system is very developed. And of course, we're participating in discussions on the central bank on the report that was given this autumn in public hearings. An interesting trend is, a very important trend, not interesting, but very important, is the appearance of more shaped rules of taxation that's using digital assets and so on, and some fixations of transactions. And of course, it is necessary. The regulation is very important for the appearance of players in this market, and we can see when there is regulation, there is interest for the companies entering the market, interest for new technologies, new projects, and new digital assets. And of course, a very interesting factor, competition or versus cooperation of classical financial market players and new fintech companies, appearance of neobanks, and different interesting partnerships, alliances, and the work of new digital companies as crypto stock exchange in cooperation with licensed companies and state bodies, and production of new. Next slide, please. We spoke about recommendations. We have examples of another synergy, SEC-Ether Delta. It's an example of how regulator acts in this field. Next slide. I will stop on new directive regulation that is adopted right now. In addition to payment regulation, it's about e-money, covers all the markets, the whole market, and we have a certain understanding of the status of these crypto assets, about payments in these crypto assets, investments. Beyond the framework of this regulation is the financial operations, shares, bonds, and other assets. There is a criticism to this regulation from the participants of the market, from lawyers. It's being widely discussed about one-side approach and fixation only on financial markets, because it's a more broader. Okay, next slide, please. It's shown on the slide what new assets will enter this regulation. This is an example of integration and harmonization, a further movement that can be very useful for BRICS countries and for any kind of collaboration. And of course for the development of national legislation, because for countries like Russia we have to take into consideration difficulties in the processes of harmonization of the local legislation, which is not also very easy. Next slide, please. We spoke about PSD2. And next slide, please. Yeah. And here we have a lot of discussion. I will not stop on that in details, but again, altogether it creates a certain example of harmonization, of progressive approach that has a lot of criticism, again, from the side of the players of classical markets, from banks, but nevertheless, this harmonization and unification and work without mediators, speed up and use of new technologies is a tendency, of course. Next slide, please. We spoke about digital currencies of central banks. I gave these examples. If you are interested, I can send you the presentations, and of course I have links for living examples. And next slide, please. It's a bit of statistics. So the Bank of International Settlements, so it's a number of research that connected with digital currencies of central banks. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention. And I think we can have another slide. Just a few words about me. I am ready to answer your questions. Yes, Maria, thank you very much for a very interesting report. I know that you've been working in the field of digital currencies for a long time, and not in theoretical, but more in practical part. You have a lot of practical experience of working with different projects in different countries and different jurisdictions. And finally today, we are here in Russia this year adopted a law on digital financial assets, 259, and previously we had a law on crowdfunding, and right now our central bank is speaking about digital ruble. So how do we look, in your opinion, are we lagging behind, or when we are dragging behind? What can you tell for our audience and for business? Do we have chance? I think we have chance, and in many fields we are. We moved further very well. The position of Central Bank of Russia that concerns digital currencies is very harsh, strict, because we don't want competition to digital ruble. And of course, a lot is the serious highlight is made on money laundering and so on. But we have very progressive things like project of fast payments project of central bank, external identification and so on, biometrics and many other positive and progressive things If we speak about national payment system, we can have we can speak a lot about. But of course, if we speak about financial digital assets, of course we're late for 2 or 3 years. There is a demand in Russia for this service. I like Swiss model or Singapore model, when we're not expecting a big law to be adopted. And then there will be some acts, and the judges can learn how to use it. But at first, people come to the regulator, and then the regulator answers how, using existing laws, it can be implemented, gives recommendations, gives guidelines, and creates technological departments that considers each project, and tax agencies work inside this project as well. It's a classic system. Everything is allowed, what is not prohibited. And in Russia it took a bit different form, and which wasn't very effective. But today we have new financial platforms. We have platforms for allocation of digital assets, digital financial assets. We created analysis of jurisdiction for main players, main word players, and they can come to Russia only right now. The law was adopted, but unfortunately we had to move not to Russia first of all. But right now we have this opportunity, and of course they have a lot of criticism to technological apparatus. We compare it with foreign experience, other legislation, the speed of adaptation, but so on. This year we witnessed huge steps forward, and we worked on the questions concerning, and we worked with Skolkovo and digital economy, sent their offers about the changes or amendments to the tax code offered by Minister of Finance. Yeah, it's on the tip of the pen. Yeah, thank you, Maria. It was very interesting, and your experience as well. Dear colleagues, I offer to speak about initiatives in Russia about digital ruble, and then turn to the experience of Bank of Brazil, what our colleagues are doing right now overseas. And the first question I would like to address to Denis. Denis, what do you think? You represent one of the most IT developed banks. I speak frankly. I am, as an individual, I am your client, and I'm very satisfied with the digital solutions that I can use. So, what do you think about why, for a long time, central banks, both Russian, ignored or was a bit afraid, as Maria said, was looking from a side on the development of digital technologies within the framework of creation of payment system BRICS-Pay. I offered this summer the line that the developed payment system BRICS-Pay will support digital currencies of central banks. Central bank was really against this sentence, and we had to remove it. And today the banks are joining this digital race. So what has happened in financial sphere? Why it is so? Andrei, thank you very much for the question. Do you hear me okay? Okay. I have to say that any innovation, it must, must get its time. It's very important concerning mental and technical, readiness because the practice shows that you can address to any innovation, not only financial. If we take the latest 100 years, the history of innovations, and they happen, and the mass implementation of what was created happens only after some time. Why? Because there are two aspects. First, people don't accept it very fast and don't understand what to do with it. And the second is the thing that is how and where this innovation appeared is not ready yet. I mean, the technological components where they must fit and so on. The second is the legislation. Third is the readiness to use and consume new type of money, not only by population and corporation, but also by central banks. It happened this way that the story with cryptocurrency, with digital money, was before time, but it happened when everything was not ready to accept it, to use it. So the set of technological components, protocols, that was used for business logics and the understanding of what can be created, that we can create programmed money, has just come into the use. It hasn't existed. We just had cash and we had non-cash money that still exists today. That live in centralized systems, but that leave some distributed business logics where they have to put this money in. Because if we look at what must be used this digital ruble or digital yuan for of any central bank, then so this is in the state part, it's control of where the government spends money. So it's a bit colored money, right? And I think that the market today is ready. If we speak about technologies, if we speak about understanding how to work with it, and how to implement it into the way of consumption by a corporation, by an individual, or by a central bank. So, from what do we see? We see the following. We see that the banks are following their clients right now. They implement services in the systems, in the applications where the client consume this or that service or product. And in these systems, there's certain logics of how the money is spent, and that's how they implement the certain business projects, the business processes, and the banks can implement it. The question of digital money and electronic money is very different. I mean, the nature of this money is different, because the e-money, they're distracted from any business process. They live somewhere else independently. They come somewhere, they fix somehow, but generally speaking, it's a disrupted process. And the digital experience that starts with some application, in mobile application, web application, it presumes that all the major services implemented in this and adjusted to this platform. That's why the modern bank that creates the services must provide the fact that the client who will work with these assets, with this digital money, who will be users of this or that applications, can get all their clientele experience. And digital currency, digital money, they are about that you have integration of client experience implemented into the business process, B2B, B2C, and so on. But pay attention that it must be on modern corporate applications. Can be capital markets. They have everything accept money. They don't have money transfer. Money transfer lives somewhere else. They're not implemented into this application. So we have a question. If you have a digital asset, where are the transactions? How to buy it, how to change it, how to exchange it, how to sell it? And because the market of digital asset is ready right now, on the legislation level, we have a law. So it means the operations of exchange and so on will develop. So the question is how to work with it. So it means that you have a platform for assets, but you still pay for them in traditional ways. So there is a demand for a currency, maybe national currency, that would be implemented into this process and would provide free exchange of one asset into another. Yes, it is possible to unite somehow with the existing application. We do that with our bank. We can accept information in our bank and make payments and exchange and so on. But in general, the situation is that there's a new technological layer appearing, because the rest. The legacy with old information. So that's why we have a new layer, new digital layer with its logics. It comes to the use of digital assets and so on. And the initiative of central bank is easily implemented into this layer, and the banks must know how to implement into this or that application that the clients use, or make payments for this or that certain types of goods and services, because I think payment in digital currency, doesn't matter of central bank or whatever, will be based on some approaches that we use today. For example, QR, or implemented invoicing in the application. So it all be used and reused, added, and we have a situation that the international market is ready technologically from the point of view of different components. If we said digital ruble several years ago, we discussed it and that's it. But today we have a number of components around legislation, who is the emittent of its money, and that can provide technological correspondence of legislation to what the society demands. So I have this kind of opinion, and this is the trend. It's unstoppable. We have to understand how to work with it, and I think that the innovations that will be within the framework of payments and payment systems were being ready. They come to the certain correspondence, this number of components, legislation, mentality of people, and other services. It's even right now. So we had a certain, disagreement when the blockchain moved forward, and the legislation is lagging behind, and in 10th century and so on. So this gap of different readiness did not allow to implement it, because we had different separate components. And right now we move to a certain level where everything is very even and in certain correspondence. So we can speak about practical application. Yes, Denis, thank you very much. It's very interesting, because you and your bank have experience of using smart contracts in that paradigm of existing ruble today. And if I'm not mistaken, together with S7 and Gazprom Neft, you developed a platform that allowed to speed up the payments between legal entities for filling tanks of airplanes, jet planes. So Alpha Bank is one of the banks that has understanding how to work with it and knows certain applications. So thank you very much for reminding this case. It was the best case when and we faced the situation where super new technology implemented to the sales of clients must provide speed. It provides, but not enough. It's not quick enough. So we speak about to make it 24/7 online, what the clients need, status, money transfer, and so on. There must be a new layer created that wouldn't face the productivity of the existing service, closure of banking days, and so on. So it's a new layer, absolutely new layer, and we implemented it, and we saw a certain ineffectiveness in ourselves when this new technology that in itself it does everything online, but it faced the productivity of the existing banking world order, I would say. When the day starts, when the day closes, when there's periods of delay of system. All this is a certain drawback of the past that we have, and the new system shouldn't have it. And digital money, digital layer, they provide this experience and workability of the infrastructure of the application. It must be synchronized because it gets that you take a new platform that faces the old infrastructure, because all the operations are made in the database somewhere down there, down below, and then you have and there is no correspondence between what you do with the client and with the infrastructure that is below, so that the right experience in terms of money movement to be successful, you must have smooth platform and infrastructure. Why, for example, in Europe, neobanks are developing so quickly? Because they make digital experience on absolutely new layer that the banks cannot provide, because they are not, they are slower because they need to change their service, their technologies, and so on. But applications, they buy the service that is implemented and provides it to the clients in the shape and the form clients want to get it. And in this case, corporate client or private client, they're not different, because they all want to get quality service, and these technologies provide to do that. Banks must know how to implement into it and to show how it will work. So that's why when we implemented DLT opportunities, online payments, smart contracts, and so on, we learned a lot about ourselves as well when we thought that we are digitalized, but we had to grow up to this level of technologies. And a short question before I will leave you. If we speak in the plain language, I'm interested, as a client of the bank, I'm interested with the appearance of digital ruble. For me, what will change for me? Like our company, and as a legal entity, for example, has an account with Alpha Bank, and for me as a ordinary user, as a natural person, as a legal person, what will change for me in banks when the digital ruble will start working? I will have faster payments, services will be cheaper. What are the benefits for us as ordinary people, and what are the benefits for business? Can you answer this question? It's a very good question, because I have a position of creation of any digital unit of any country in general We think we save, but in order to save, we need to spend a lot on any technologies, on any innovations. If you want to save, first of all, you have to spend a lot to create the conditions. What concerns ordinary clients, I think that the major competitiveness is on the level of applications. For client, how much does it cost to transfer money? They're not zero interest rate, but of course they're getting down in terms of price. So the bank, in order to earn money, the bank has to prove every time why the client must come to his application, or how the bank will hold this client with other services, why the client chooses the bank. And with the introduction of digital ruble, I'm not speaking about perspectives of when it will be, but I think it's a question of 3 years when this effect will be felt. I would say for the client, probably, they will have new opportunities of investment, first of all, because digital ruble will live in very close connection with digital assets, and probably the possibility to conduct any operations with real estate, to buy some assets, or to storing these assets in digital format, which wasn't impossible years ago. Maybe tokenize the building or the flat and use these tokens in different financial operations. So we have a whole list of new opportunities that were separated previously, because you can tokenize any kind of asset and then you can use it. You can use it for any kind of financial operations. So the question of these digital directions that are going with each, so it's a number of opportunities for those who know how to use it. Will it lead to lower costs? Maybe classical transfers, they will be, because people will still transfer money to each other. It will be online, it will work very fast. So what we have today, right? The system of fast payments and so on. But digital money, they will be traced money, first of all, because you can trace it and understand. Maybe they are more safe, because they can be traced, and they couldn't be hid like original money. But you can provide more smart payments connected to some logics that would be in this or that money or processes. So something that we don't have with non-cash payment today. Maybe, I don't know whether I answered your question or not, but I would say that the practice around it is still forming. Some of my assumptions are based on what I see in the Russian market and what I see on foreign markets as well. But I can say for sure that in many technological aspects, Russia is on the front edge, despite the fact that we don't have the practical implementation today. The practice is that we look for a long time and then we implement it in one moment. Thank you, Denis. As far as I understand, I will simplify your answer. we would hardly save money, but we will have more opportunities to earn, because we are on business forum, and for us as for representatives of business and common people, we will have more opportunities, more comforts, and more instruments to invest money with profit and to control it. I guess this is good. Thank you very much, Denis. And here I would like to move to our colleagues from Brazil. It's very interesting to find out how Central Bank of Brazil looks at the creation of digital real. What are the perspectives? What they have achieved. So please, Mr. Melin, take the floor. It's very interesting to find out what is going on in Brazil. It's a very huge country with a very developed banking system and payment system. So please take the floor.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and like I was last year in this conference, and I'm very glad to be back. A lot of things have been happening in Brazil lately concerning the theme of this meeting that we have today, which is, on one hand, we're talking about digital currencies, but on the other hand, it's a much broader subject, because we are also talking about all sorts of innovations that have been brought to the financial markets and to banking, to the everyday life of people and businesses, because of electronic technology, of higher levels of connectivity, and all of this has been building up for many years. Brazil, as you said, has a highly developed banking system, probably owing to a very negative factor. Some 20, 30 years ago, Brazil used to have a very high rate of inflation. And it had been so high, and it remained for so long as a part of the life of the country, that a lot of mechanisms had to be developed to deal with it. And if you imagine that you live in a country where the prices of basic goods, even the price for a metro ticket or a bus fare, or for fruit in the supermarket, is changing every day or every 2 days of the week, you can start to picture how confusing and how dangerous this can be for someone who, for example, only gets his money once a month through a payment of his salary. Of course, for business people, it's also very difficult, because they have to keep in line with their suppliers in order not to lose money. So all of this long period of high inflation led to an initiative on the part of the Brazilian private banking system to adapt and to innovate in terms of technology very early on. So Brazil has been on the forefront of experimenting with new technologies from the start. So, of course, when you talk about any sort of economic issue from the perspective of a regulator, obviously your vision has to be a bit difficult. A bit different, but also difficult from the one of the other agents in the economy, because as a regulator, you have to make sure that the system will work and provide security and functionality for all the participants, for businesses, for financial institutions, and for the public. Sometimes this concern of regulators does not evolve at the same pace as the eagerness of members of the market to go ahead. It's like if you have a new toy, if a child has a new toy for Christmas, they want to play with it right away, even if they do not know how to play with it very well. And so you have to make sure that the conditions are in place so that this new toy, this new technology will deliver what it is supposed to deliver, which is good times and fun for the child, and not involve any risks for everyone else, not set the house on fire. So regulators have to be a bit more cautious. And I'd like to start my presentation precisely by showing this. Look, first slide, please. Look at the size of the Brazilian economy. We're talking about the GDP of nearly $2 trillion. And we're talking about, crucially, over 200 million people, right? When you have over 200 million people in an economy, and you're dealing with a very large movement of payments and a very intense movement of money, you have to use the old idea that you must first learn to walk and then learn how to run. I'm afraid that in some cases, when the financial market is concerned, people do not want to run, they want to fly. And so usually regulators have to say, let's first learn how to walk, then learn how to run, so that we can learn to fly. We all want to fly. In the end, we know that we have to fly, we want to fly, but we have to go step by step and acquire all the skills and master all the tools that we need, first to walk, then to run, and then to fly. Next slide, please. And here is why. Look at the number of institutions, financial institutions, offering payment services in Brazil. You have 152 banks, okay? You have 939 non-banking financial institutions. And as you can see there, you have the one central bank, which of course has to make sure that everything that all these people do to those, with those 210 million other players that are the population of Brazil, we have to make sure that all of this is going to work. And it's going to work for the benefit of society. And you see, so here is something that I like continually to go back to. There is an interest of financial institutions to move forward as fast as they can in order to gain an advantage over the competition, and this is absolutely natural. This is actually very commendable that they want to be competitive. And also there is, on the side of businesses and on the side of the public, there is an impulse to want to have better service, faster service, as soon as they can, and as cheap as they can. But also, of course, the businesses and the public want the price to be right and want their financial resources to be safe, the transactions to be operated in such a way that their own resources are going to be protected. But not only that, there is a step that is more important than that. The whole system is going to be protected. Everybody wants the financial system to be robust, to be healthy, and to work properly. And when you have more than 1,000 financial institutions working for a public of 200 million people, you have to keep in mind all the figures that are in front of you. Next slide, please. So here now we come to the first indicator of why it is a rational and sound step for Brazil to adopt an instant payment system, a digital instant payment system. Not only do we already have a large banking sector, and also we have a sector that is present all over the territory of Brazil, which is a very large territory. And as we mentioned before, all these banks are technologically quite up to date, which makes the introduction of new instruments easier. We know, for instance, of many countries, developing countries that also have a large financial system, a large banking sector, but their level of technological capacity is not perhaps the same. Even some rich countries, some developed countries. I remember that when I went to Britain for my PhD studies 30 years ago, I was astounded that when I got there, my bank, at the time it was Barclays Bank, where I had my banking account, didn't have even half of the facilities, the instruments that I had in my bank in Brazil, because even back then, the technology was already a part of day-to-day life in Brazilian banking. But one thing that we do not have, and that has just been introduced in the country, is an instant payment tool, an instant payment instrument. And by looking at this table, you can see that every day you have 41 billion, over 41 billion payments being made in the country on a cashless basis. Okay, we're not counting here all the transactions that involve paper money. We're talking about payment transactions that are made without paper money every day in Brazil. And we're talking about over 41 billion transactions. So of course, for these transactions to have to wait for 24 hours for them to be closed adds significant costs to the economic system. A few years ago, a tool was developed. It was called the direct electronic transfer. In Portuguese, the acronym is TED. So the TED, direct electronic transfer, was adopted so that people didn't have to wait for 24 hours. They could have debit and credit happening during the same day. But this is restricted to certain kinds of banking accounts, and this is limited to payments that are realized that take place during certain business hours. Before this business hours commence and after they end, you cannot have this electronic direct transfer. And that is when you get to a level of having over 41 billion daily cash payments, you have to think about another sort of solution. Next slide, please. So just to break down a bit the cashless payments, just to have the numbers, take a look at the volume here. You have card payments and e-money payments are growing by an incredible rate. Pay attention that these figures are not the figures for the volume, the actual volume. This is the increase in volume. This is how fast the use of these instruments is growing. So card payments in total are growing by 37% a year. But e-money payment, digital payments are growing by 2,000% a year. And you can see that that has jumped from 21% of growth in 2017 to 10 times more that, 200% in 2008, and then 2,000% in 2019. This year, it's going to grow even more with the introduction of the new instrument, with the instant payment, which we call the PIX system. The PIX system has, as a matter of fact, been introduced 1 month ago, and operations are already fully underway as we speak. Please, the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. Here, just to give you an idea now of the values, not of the rate of growth, okay? You see that the cashless payments, the largest portion of it is still a portion of it that is not made up of sorry, I was talking about the next slide. This one, I just wanted to give you an idea of the averages, okay? The averages here, you can have an idea that you have an average value per payment of $375, more or less. And every year, you have each inhabitant having a more or less $3,000 moved on average. Of course, many people have much less than that, and all the big players make payments of a higher order. But on average, that would be around $73,000. And it's and the important thing here, the most important number on this panel is on this table is the value of cashless payments against GDP. It's 842%. That means in the end, we have almost $16 trillion for a GDP that is around 2 trillion, okay? This is the money multiplier, okay? This is the rotation of money in the economy. And this shows how important it is to have an instrument for this sort of instant payment. Finally, just a breakdown of the average values here. Next slide, please. You can see here that on this table that basically, for the moment, e-money payments are very small. Up to 2019, although they're growing at a phenomenal rate of 2,000% a year, it's still very little. You see, it's 38. You have here the average value per inhabitant of only $38. And you have the average value of each payment of only $4. Okay, that was up to 2019. This is precisely what, if you put those two together, a very small value per payment, about average per payment, and a very small average per person, and you put it on the other hand, you have a very high rate of growth for using this particular instrument. This is why the Brazilian Central Bank decided to provide a platform for instant payment. And that's the point I want to make next with the next slide. The next slide will show that the PIX instant payment system, which has just been adopted, it's been on development for almost 2 years, but it went live last month. The PIX system is the provider is the Brazilian central bank. So the main things to know here is that the central bank will be the payment scheme owner, okay? That means that the Central Bank of Brazil makes the rule book for the system. And also the Brazilian Central Bank is the infrastructure provider. For the moment, it's the only infrastructure provider, but the system is being built in such a way that other infrastructure providers, private ones, may join. Of course, the rule book, the scheme will still be owned by the Brazilian Central Bank as a regulator, but you can add other infrastructure providers if and when they are willing to invest, and of course when they meet the working criteria that have been set down in the rule book. Second is that the central bank has developed the centralized settlement infrastructure and the proxy database. That means to say, without getting overly technical, that means to say that all the heavy IT work, all the costly IT development has been done already by the Brazilian Central Bank. And so the PIX has a flexible and open structure so that 980 institutions are already applied and are already operating within the system. The last item is a very important one. PIX is not a CBDC, is not a central bank digital currency. It's not the digital real. And why is it not the digital real? Because we think that we have, in order to get to a digital currency, to make it work and to make it in the interest of the whole system, not only of a few agents that would, of course, if the digital currency was rushed in and they could make money very fast, but we want the whole system to benefit. We want natural persons, private persons, and we want especially small and medium-sized businesses, we want them to benefit from that. Right now, the conclusion that the Brazilian Monetary Authority has arrived at is we must go in by stages. First, we must have an instant payment system. Then we will develop, we will put in place a sandbox by which we can have various players come up with new platforms, new technologies that will be useful to exploit this instant payment system, and we will help them do that. You know, the sandbox is a sort of environment for the development of new IT tools where private developers will be able to come with fresh ideas. They don't have to be rich. They don't have to be a big bank in order to do that. All they have to do is that they have to have a workable concept, and they will then receive the support, the technical infrastructure to develop that concept. And then if it passes muster, if it is good enough, if it helps the system, it will then become a reality. And all of this is leading towards the final goal, which we'll talk later, which is the goal of an open banking system in Brazil. For us, the open banking system is the gateway to the digital currency. If you don't have an open banking system and you try to rush in the digital currency, you will have problems for sure. All of you are probably aware of the criticisms and the concerns that have been already expressed by many authorities worldwide. For instance, the chairman of the European Central Bank, whom I happen to know personally, Mr. Agustin Cartens, who used to be the Mexican Minister of Finance, already mentioned a number of concerns. In his case, they have more to do with a certain orthodox view of monetary theory, having to do with how this could affect monetary supply. But they are valid concerns. On the other hand, the Canadian Central Bank had more practical worries about the introduction of the digital Canadian dollar. And they had security concerns, they had concern about how to avoid money laundering, and they also had concerns about how secure those assets would be in terms of piracy, of digital piracy. Speculation, piracy, and money laundering are three of the worries that the Canadians expressed. And so we could, as one of the other speakers mentioned, we could talk about digital currencies and the pros and the cons for an entire conference. But what I would like to say is just to convey to you that the reflection, the brainstorming that the Brazilian Central Bank gave to the matter, in conjunction with many other central banks that we have discussed the matter with, has been this: that we should go we should make this climb to the digital currency grade by grade, starting with the instant payment system, with the PIX, then with the sandbox for developing new technologies, and then having a full open banking system. This is not pie in the sky. This is not just regulators' talk to say, oh, we'll do it tomorrow, we'll do it some other day, but not today. We have a timetable for that, and it's a very short one. But we are firmly convinced that unless we do first things first, unless we run before we fly, we could generate more problems than solutions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Please.
Mr. Milling, please.
It's very interesting what you're saying. Please finalize your presentation.
Okay, I will. I won't explain how the PIX works. If you want the explanation, it's in my presentation. All of the benefits in terms of for the payers, for the payees, especially for small and medium businesses, all of these benefits are detailed in my presentation. And I would like then just to go to slide number 16, please. Slide number 16. Okay. No, that's not 16. That's the next one, please. Okay, that's all right. Go forward, please. Yes. That's the one, please. Oh no, one back. There you are. So this is just to give you a quick idea of what we understand by the open banking, which is the goal of our present initiative. We want data to be shared in the banking industry as a whole, okay? Because these presently, all of the data in terms of the products, of the assets, these days, each bank has access only to its base of clients. And if I'm a client of one bank and I want other banks to know how much I have or what sort of financial assets I hold, I cannot do that. This information cannot be shared. at the same time, if I want to know what services, what products other banks might offer me, I have to go through a lengthy process of mining for the information on the internet, or perhaps going in person to a bank agency in order to find out.
Mr. Melin, you had a very interesting presentation and full of details and statistics. This information is very hard to get, and in this respect, you touched a very interesting topic of sandbox, regulatory sandbox. We also have, in the central bank, we have the same institution, and recently we have adopted new legislation that broadens the utilizations of this kind of specific sandboxes for projects, so to test new financial technologies. And at the end of our panel discussion, I would like to address to our guest from South Africa. Why it's interesting is, just as I said in the beginning, during heading of South Africa in the total report, annual report of BRICS countries, it was written about the necessity of payment system of BRICS countries that received the name of BRICS Pay. Mr. Mtembum, was it accidentally that when South Africa was heading, this idea had a reflection on official level? As far as I understand, in South Africa, there is no national currency system as in other BRICS countries. Mr. Mtembu.
Thank you, colleagues. I hope you can hear me properly. I think it certainly wasn't coincidental that it came from, that this was quite an important issue for South Africa. It also wasn't a coincidence that during South Africa's chairship of BRICS, that one of the issues that were in the thematic areas and quite a priority was essentially moving into the fourth industrial revolution. I think one of the important things to factor in, looking at not only the South African landscape, but also the African landscape, is that because over the years, in previous years, you've had large parts of the population existing outside of the formal banking sector, is that you've had a higher, level of innovations that have been taking place actually on the continent. I noted our previous speaker mentioning an example, a comparative of the type of services that he could get, in the UK, for instance, or in other parts of Europe compared to Brazil. And, this is something that is also quite an experience for South African consumers. We actually feel that other parts, so-called developed countries, are actually behind the type of services that we are able to access in our own countries. Things like mobile payments in South Africa and in many parts of Africa are things that have, that are quite normal. E-wallets are quite normal, quite widely used throughout. And these are initiatives that have sought to bring in people into the into the formal banking sector. So essentially, even if people don't have a bank account, I can still send someone money through an e-wallet if they don't have a bank account. Somebody in the rural parts of South Africa, as long as they can get themselves either to an ATM or if they can get themselves to a retail store which has linkages, with the various banks in the country, they are able to actually access that money. Similarly to if I just have my cell phone and I don't have my wallet, I've left my wallet at home. This is not a worry anymore. As long as I have internet and I'm able to find a hotspot somewhere, I can actually have access, to that money. This is very different to parts, at least many parts of Europe that I had sort of, had an experience of interacting with, because we found that there it was still a bit more conservative in terms of the use of digital payments, in terms of the use of technology. They still followed a very traditional sort of approach. I mean, I can even just ordinary things like getting your a new bank card, something I can get done in an hour or two. I was always shocked in Germany, for instance, that they would first have to send me an envelope with my bank card, and then 2 weeks after that, they would send me another envelope with my PIN code. So, for me as a South African or an African user of banking services, I always found that quite strange and quite and quite behind, frankly. So I think this context that I'm painting, it actually puts South Africa and the African continent in a position where you've also seen an increasing use of cryptocurrencies, and cryptocurrencies also for business and among small and medium enterprises. And this has actually been quite interesting. So I definitely think it wasn't coincidental. I think where South Africa, there is, for instance, from the central bank, there is in fact an ongoing process and a working group that's looking at various elements and pros and cons in terms of South Africa actually having a digital currency that would be backed by the rand. So that study is actually quite, I guess, that those discussions are at an advanced sort of stage. And I think what the team is basically doing is they're looking comparatively at other countries. They're looking at the regulation frameworks globally and looking at what are the pros and cons in terms of South Africa actually moving in that direction. I mean, South Africa does have a fairly advanced banking sector. It's one of the reasons why South Africa is a member of the G20, despite the fact that it's relatively smaller economy than compared to others, but it has a fairly advanced banking sector, which has been also quite innovative, even though there's a high concentration in terms of, we speak about the big four banks that dominate, South African banking sector. But I think what this tells us is that if you combine that, the sort of landscape I've been painting, if you combine that also with some of the initiatives that have been coming from the South African Reserve Bank, and also the studies that have been coming from the central bank, it's quite clear that even the Reserve Bank has a strategy plan for 2025, which is looking at South Africa's national systems of payment, looking at which areas need to actually be updated. It was quite, it was noted that, obviously there would have to be some regulatory or some legal changes also that would have to take place to the manner in which, or at least to the powers that the South African Reserve Bank also has. So this is the ecosystem that is sort of defining where South Africa and other African countries are. I think it's also because of, in some places, poor infrastructure, which has actually forced innovation when it comes to making it easier for people to access money, but also making it easier for people to actually make different kinds of payment, whether through a card, whether through digital means. And that landscape has made consumers much more open to the idea of something like a BRICS Pay, for instance. So South African consumers and African consumers in general are less skeptical of some of these digital innovations that are taking place within the banking sector. In fact, there was a new bank that just came on board called Time Bank, which is really moving ahead in terms of digital payments, in terms of bringing on board much more consumers who are outside of the formal banking system, but who do not necessarily have to go into a branch, who do not need to necessarily have the physical infrastructure to actually get to. And I think this is what makes for an interesting. The one side, I think, where South Africa will obviously have to look at is that still most of our transactions are still through if you look at the major banks, it's still, and the international transactions, it's still largely utilizing the SWIFT system. So it's not, for instance, like maybe some of the other BRICS countries who have actually gone further in terms of having, a national system that is actually an alternative, perhaps, to SWIFT. And I think this is something that is being discussed, it is being debated. It is something that the major banks have essentially said becomes costly, for transactions. And I think it's something we have to be realistic about, in a sense that the politicization of the global banking system has become a reality that countries such as South Africa and others within the BRICS have to take note of, in a sense that you are entering into an environment which is much more geopolitically tense. And countries have to think about not only an environment that is enabling and open, but they have to think also about how to protect their interests in an environment where, for instance, it becomes much more geopolitically charged. One area, for instance, for South Africa was how, South Africa's relations with Iran, for instance, where many South African decision makers and policymakers felt that because of the sanctions and because of the changes by the Trump administration, it made it obviously much more difficult for South Africa to keep some of its relations with Iran. And those are some issues, obviously, which become a factor, so it does become a security issue. And we can't just assume a depoliticized global systems of payment. And that's why I think there is a high sort of appetite in South Africa for moving towards something, or at least being open to ideas such as BRICS Pay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tender, for this answer. And of course, our friends, many people presume and prognose that in the coming 20 years, the African continent will be the driver of world economy, as it used to be with China. And in this respect, these parallel lines that both in Russia we have a huge number of banking services and payment services, and Brazil is quite advanced in comparison with the UK or Europe. It says us about that countries such as Brazil and Russia made a giant leap in the development of banking system. We didn't have it, and the banks can use and implement new technologies at once. And in this respect, African continent has unbanking population. So people who don't have a bank account, and a lot of people use mobile operators to make payments. And in this respect, for Africa, there's a huge opportunities are opened to make a leap on a new technological level using digital payment systems. My friends, we are a bit over time. The time flies, really. Thank you for all the participants of this discussion. I believe that if we look into the past and into the future and into the present, please pay attention that the technologies that we possess today or used to possess, they're more or less reflected in monetary terms that we have. When people used salt or furs of different animals to exchange it and use them as money, when the iron casting was invented, then we had gold, then we have money. In China, we had first banknotes, and paper was invented in China. And then in the 50s, we had cashless payments. At the appearance of computer technologies, we have e-money, and today the technology level is what Denise was speaking about. They become even, and we're coming to the point when the number of technologies and innovations is transforming into the quality. We have a new form of digital money. We have new payment system appearance as BRICS, for example, that is being developed right now, that will allow us to implement in life this sort of new finances, new money, new assets, new financial assets. My name is Andrei. I didn't introduce myself. I'm dealing with, my company is dealing with the development of payment systems. Joyce, we are active member of working group on Business Council of BRICS on financial services, and we also participate in creation of BRICS Pay. And within the framework, maybe it's not, we're not speaking for the first time, but on the 26th on the 24th, there will be another conference in Ufa dedicated to the use of